Hi guys, and welcome to another week. This week I've had a question from a long-term subscriber, Mark Fernley, and Mark asked about some tips on bounce. I'm assuming he's thinking of kind of what it does and what the different aspects of different wedges for different courses, etc. So I'm going to run through some of those things really quickly with you guys now, because it's a confusing subject, and if you're new to the game, or maybe you've just never looked into it, there are things that can help you, and there's a few myths and things that probably a little bit sales pitchy. The bounce on our wedges is kind of a strange subject, because there's an awful lot of variations and a kind of a lot of confusing stuff that we need to cut through before we get to the nitty-gritty of how it can possibly help you, and how possibly you might have picked up a second-hand wedge and it might be the wrong one for you. But we'll have a look at a few of those things, and as ever I like to make things really simple and not get too tied up in sales pitches, so we'll be doing none of that. Probably I won't make too many friends in the Vokey world, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. So what is bounce? It sticks out lower than the leading edge of the wedge. Can you see it sticks down there? Now this one has got 8 degrees of bounce on it, and I would say that's about standard. Anywhere between 7 and 10 degrees is about standard. Every club has a little bit of bounce on it from your 3-iron right through, and kind of generally speaking, you know, if you have a 5-iron, you've got 5 degrees bounce, 6 is 6 degrees, 7 up to 9, which is 9 degrees, and then we get into our wedges, and that's when it all seems to go a bit weird. Now my belief is just pick a standard bounce. We're talking about very small margins, but it does make a bit of a difference, because you can imagine if you're playing off of a very bare lie and that bottom edge is hitting the ground, which is hard, it's a hard packed lie, first that leading edge is going to hit a little bit up the golf ball, isn't it? It's not going to dig into the ground, because that bounce is meant to stop the club from digging in too much, because we don't really want too big a divot at any particular point, especially with wedges. And so if you can imagine that bottom edge is digging into the bottom of the ground there, you can bounce off of that bottom up into the golf ball, and it effectively knife the ball. So the way I've always looked at it is, like years ago, we never really played with various different bounces. We would kind of try and develop our swing, our technique to suit the situations. Because if I've got a load of bounce on this club and I hold my hands forward, the bounce is never going to get offered to the floor. And so what we would end up doing is you get a bit of a hard line. You don't want to bounce off that bottom, that little blade there, and it knife the golf ball. So we would just hold our hands a little bit forward, and we would just make sure we hit the ball first and keep our hands ahead of the golf ball. Now that's nice if you've got a fair amount of skill of what you're doing. But what we're often trying to do is make a very consistent shot all the time. Try and do the same swing for everything we play, and that's where these bounces come in. But I'm saying that if you get a bounce between 7 and 10 degrees, I would go for well, I've got 8, so you know, 8 is kind of right in the middle. It's pretty good for all angles. I would recommend everybody to go for just something in the middle. Why try and go for an extreme? Even if you're playing at a links course and the ground's very tight, 8 degrees of bounce is absolutely fine. You know, why would you want to go towards like 4 or 5 degrees bounce when later on in the round you might need a bit of bounce? You might have a decent lie that you actually want to just clip it off the top of. Okay, so look at the state of this lie. It's horrible. It's sat in the divot that I've just been from, and I've got my regular bounce 60 degree club. All we've got to do is play it. I kind of like to play it just slightly back in my stance a bit. Not too much wrist break, just keep it nice, just from there to there. And it comes out absolutely fine. I would suggest, rather than changing your bounce or changing your club, I'm always suggesting that you change your technique slightly, or to try and improve your technique. Because with the right technique, bounce is quite irrelevant. So I'm always going for a very shallow arc. okay, with very little wrist brake. Now, wrist brake is always where the trouble comes in, because obviously when you take, what we're trying to do is get our club back to this position when we hit the golf ball. Now, if we take our club back like this, then suddenly we've got that factor to add to our chip. So it's always going to be better, a little bit like a putt, it's always going to be better to have very little wrist brake on it. We don't need any wrist brake, we just use a loft on the club to make the ball go higher. And so working from here, I've got my 60 degree here. Now this is just a standard kind of bear lie. I'm just going to hold up to the ball and I'm going to try not to get too much wrist brake involved. Now this will hardly use the bounce whatsoever. And that must just come off the top nicely. So all I would say, especially to Mark, 'cause I think Mark said he's going to play some links golf, which is slightly different. Definitely for links golf, it's always very nice to, for me, have a very neutral bounce on the bottom of my club, because you can work with a neutral bounce. You know, you can close it down or you can open it up, allowing, because if you move your hands back a little bit, if you put them forward, there's no bounce whatsoever. It eliminates the bounce completely. And if you move them back a little bit, it adds that bounce to the bottom. If we move them right back, obviously it's going to offer the bounce loads. And likewise, if we open the club face like this, it suddenly, what it does is this bounce then is very much more relevant to your golf swing, and you've got to be aware of that. Now, if you have something with a lot of bounce on the bottom, when you open the club face up on a bare lie, well, literally you can't do it. You're just going to knife the ball every time. So in my mind, I would always go for a standard bounce. Then you can open a club face up if you like. We can always close the club face, but you do get that option of open it, which you don't get if you've got loads of bounce on it. Because lots of bounce, open the club face, it lifts that leading edge, and you're talking knife every single time, especially when the ground's very, very hard. So just be aware when you're playing links golf and you get a very, very tight lie, I'm always thinking less wrist cock, and if the lie's very, very tight, always just try and sweep it through, holding your hands just slightly ahead of the ball, and you'll get a lovely clipped strike like that. One other thing that I actually quite like doing, just to, this is kind of a personal thing, but you can certainly give it a go, is when we're talking about sweeping the shot and hitting it a little bit lower, and trying to do our nice kind of sweeping chip motion, I always make my right grip just a little bit stronger than I have in previous shots. I just get it round this way a little bit more, not too much, just a little bit, and it just promotes that nice into out and soft shallow. So if I exaggerated it and I was like this, it's very shallow, and it just kind of, for me, it just kind of helps, because when I get my normal grip over this way, it kind of makes me almost attack into it a little bit more and kind of hit one of those nippy spinners, which you kind of don't really want when you've got a very tight lie. We're just trying to keep it nice and shallow, and trying to clip that ball off each time as best we can. I've got 4 balls. I love these little shots, just a simple chip shot. Got a little bump there, but that's no problem for us. It's raining, but other than that, I'm expecting to hold one of these 4. I'll be disappointed if I don't. Let's see what we can do. So feet quite close together, nice and shallow. I make sure I keep my right hand a little bit stronger, so a little bit further to the right, just to help me maintain that shallowness. Let's see how we get on. That's close enough. Close enough, forgive me. That's a good one. Second ball. Yes. Okay, so let's go for 2. Let's try and hold 2 now. Same shot. Not too much movement. That was in as well. Go on. Go on. Not quite. Now with the brake on this, I'm not sure I can hold this one, but we'll see. So I've got my feet quite close together. Everything's quite neutral. Nice and shallow, not too much of a wrist cock. 1 out of 4, which is what I wanted. Now, the thing is with those shots is, I mean, maybe it seemed a bit cocky, me thinking I'm going to hole 1 of 4. Not sure what a tour stat would be on that, but firstly it's in practice, and secondly you want to sort of set your sights very high on every shot that you have. You want to believe that you can do it, and you want to believe that you can hold the shot, you know, within reason, especially chip shots, because then when you hit a bad shot, like for instance if I'd have hit a disappointing one there, it would have been probably 2 feet, which is still quite a good shot, and then you've still got this chance of freely flowing through it thinking you're going to hold it, and it's absolutely crucial. I can't say enough about that. It really is an incredible part of the mental game, is to like overestimate what you can do as far as chip shots are concerned. I mean, we're playing within ourselves at the same time, you know, we're going to look at all the options. Obviously we're not going to go for a bare live flop shot and think we're going to hold it. Obviously we're going to kind of manage what actually is humanly possible and what the consequences are. But if it's a simple chip shot, yeah, I mean, why shouldn't you hold it? It's not like you've got to hit it 350 yards, and maybe you've never done that. You know, with a chip shot there's always that chance of it going in, just getting it online and it going in. Okay, we're going to go on to some hard pack stuff now. Okay, so here we go. This is the opposite end of the spectrum, and for this one, just hard pack lie. This is just kind of gravel and a bit of sand maybe, but not much sand, just mainly gravel. There's no way of taking a divot really, or an effective one. And so what I would do is I'm chipping to, let's say I'm chipping to this one on the left here. I'm not sure whether you can see that, but all I'd be thinking is neutralising the bounce completely by moving my hand slightly forward. I'm going to do the same approach. I'm just going to keep everything nice and not break the wrist too much, because as soon as I break that wrist, then we've got another factor to work into our chip shot. It's kind of fine if you're Phil Mickelson, you know, and you're doing it all the time, and you've got that that skill level, that's no problems. But for everybody else, we're just going to try and keep the hands nice and neutral, almost like a putting stroke. But I'm going to try on this one, I'm going to eliminate the bounce, because if your hands are further back, it allows the bounce to come in. A bit like when you've got a bunker shot and you're trying to use the bounce, sometimes you like the club face being a little bit further forward, because you've got that little bit of bounce on the bottom there to just boof it underneath and skid it underneath the ball. In this instance, we don't want any skidding. We want a nice clean flush hit ahead of the ball there, not down into it, just nice and shallow, but just keeping almost offering the sweet spot to the ball rather than trying to do any funny business with the bounce. So let's give it a go. Not sure how this is going to come out, but we'll see. Should be okay. Hands forward, like I always say, don't panic. I've got my slightly, again, a slightly strong right hand grip for this one. Keep our hands forward. That's pretty good. I mean, there was no, I took a very tiny little chunk out of the divot there, and balls run up to kind of a few feet. So it's all about, again, not panicking, not doing anything stupid. Don't just get over there and try and put some crazy swing on it because you think it's in a hard pack lie. The only thing I would say is every time just eliminate that wrist cock, and as long as you keep accelerating with a nice little bit of rhythm, a bit like a putting stroke, you should be fine. You should accelerate through the ball, and the club face will, the sweet spot of the ball will hit the ball first, and then what happens after that, it doesn't really matter. You know, if you just chunk into the ground a little bit after you've hit the ball, that's kind of fine. But obviously we want to hit the ball first and the sweet spot first, rather than like if we're having a bunker shot or any normal shot off of a nice lie. Really you want to hit it about an inch behind the ball, and that's when you do use the bounce at the bottom. Hopefully you've learnt a little bit out of that. I did a few chips because I know some people like to watch a few chip shots, get a little bit inspired. And there's a couple of different instances there. We've got the hard pack one, and we've got our normal one, and a couple out of little divots. But all fairly straightforward shots, guys. You should all be able to hit them all. There's not a great amount of strength or speed in it. There is a little bit of technique involved, so you do want to practice it. But next time you're walking to the driving range and you walk past the chipping green, go there first. Check it out, hit a few shots, put them in a few divots. It seems a bit kind of depressing to chip out of a divot, but to be honest with you, it's good fun when you get going, and you're actually you'll end up quite enjoying it, because with the right technique, it doesn't really matter that much, or it certainly matters less than you'd imagine. Look forward to seeing you next week, guys. Thanks for watching. Give me a subscribe. We're really close to the 1,000, which is exciting. I think it's like 980, so maybe share the video, or one of mine that you particularly liked perhaps, and we might be able to get up to 1,000 real soon. So thanks a lot, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.